What if I told you an army brought down a fortress with nothing but a shout, a city sealed shut, its gates locked, walls so high, so thick, no force had ever broken through, unshaken for generations. Armies feared it, no one dared challenge it. But then came a nation with no weapons, no ladders, no catapults, just trumpets and silence. For 6 days they marched and said nothing. But then on the 7th day, what happened next would shake the world and echo for generations. This isn't just the story of a wall collapsing. This is the story of a promise fulfilled, a people led by faith, and a God who conquers without lifting a sword. This is the story of the fall of Jericho. Music after 40 years in the wilderness, the journey was nearly over. Israel had crossed the Jordan on dry ground. The river that once stood between them and the promised land had parted by the hand of God. Their feet touched Canaan's soil for the first time. Joshua now led the people, a new leader for a new chapter. Behind him stood a nation shaped by manna, miracles, and mercy. Ahead of him loomed a city like no other. Jericho, its walls towered above the plains. A mighty fortress city with high, impenetrable walls, gates locked, watchmen alert. No army had ever breached it. To Canaan, it was an unbreakable fortress. To Israel, it was the first test of promise. It stood as an intimidating obstacle on the path God had laid out for them, heavily guarded, feared throughout the region. No one went out, no one came in. Jericho closed itself off, not because of Israel's weapons, but because of the God they served. But this battle would not be won with swords. It wouldn't be won with strength. Because the war for Jericho belonged to the Lord. Before the people ever stepped foot into Canaan, Joshua had quietly sent 2 men ahead from their camp at Shittim to scout out the land, especially Jericho. The men crept through the darkened valleys and approached the great city quietly. As they entered Jericho, their path brought them to a modest house nestled into the city wall itself. The owner was Rahab, a woman known in Jericho, though not for noble reasons. She was a prostitute, living on the margins of society. But why Rahab? Why would God choose a prostitute, a woman so overlooked by society, to play a part in his plan as his instrument? Rahab was no ordinary woman. Though her profession placed her outside respectability, she had heard the stories of a God who split the Red Sea, who provided manna from heaven, and who conquered mighty kings like Sihon and Og on the east of the Jordan. Her heart was stirred with awe and reverence. She believed that this God was unlike any other. That night, when the king of Jericho got word that Israelite spies had entered the city, he sent men to Rahab's home, demanding she hand them over. Rahab faced a choice. She could betray the strangers and save herself, or protect them and risk everything. With a courageous heart, she hid the spies on her roof under stalks of flax, and, claiming that the men had already fled, she sent the king's soldiers on a wild chase outside the city. When the danger had passed, she climbed to the roof under the moonlight and spoke to the men. I know that the Lord has given you this land. We are all afraid of you. Everyone in this country is living in terror. For we have heard how the Lord made a dry path for you through the Red Sea. We know what you did to Sihon and Og. The Lord your God is the supreme God of the heavens above and the earth below. She then made a bold request. Please swear to me by the Lord that you will be kind to me and my family when Jericho falls. The spies, moved by her faith, agreed. They gave her a simple sign, a scarlet cord to tie on her window. They said to her, "Hang this cord on the window facing the outside wall and gather your family inside your home. When the Lord delivers Jericho, no harm will come to you." With that, Rahab helped them escape, lowering them down through a rope outside her window. The men fled into the hills, hiding for 3 days, as Jericho remained sealed tight. Then they returned to Joshua with one message: "The Lord has truly given all this land into your hands." Now, as the Israelites stood on the other side of the Jordan, that old report from the spies echoed in Joshua's mind. Encouraged by their words, he began to prepare the people for battle. But what came next was not a traditional military strategy. There would be no ladders, no battering rams, no siege towers. Instead, God gave Joshua a most unusual instruction. March around the city once every day for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times and then blow the trumpets. When you hear a long blast, have all the people shout with a mighty shout. Then the walls of the city will collapse. It sounded absurd, childlike even, but Joshua knew God's ways were higher than man's understanding. So he gathered the people and shared the plan. By the way, if you find any of these videos interesting, meaningful, or enjoyable, please consider subscribing. These take a long time to make, and it really helps out. And if you love what we're doing and want to go a step further, you can now become a channel member. Your support helps us reach more people with God's Word through powerful animation. Just click join and be part of the mission. On the first day, the people of Israel assembled in quiet obedience and determination. Under the watchful eyes of Jericho's guards, they marched in perfect formation around the city's walls. At their forefront, 7 priests carried the Ark of the Covenant, the sacred symbol of God's presence among them. As the procession advanced, the only sound to pierce the heavy silence was the deep, haunting blast of 7 ram's horns, echoing like a divine call through the air. The guards peered from the city walls, puzzled by the strange procession. By the 2nd and 3rd days, the soldiers on the walls began to sneer and mock. Is this some childish ritual? No attack, no fight. What trick is this? But by the 5th and 6th days, laughter turned to unease. The endless circling, the silence except for the horns. It was no ordinary battle. The mood in Jericho changed. Markets emptied, windows closed. Fear started to ripple through the soldiers as they stood stiff on the walls, their eyes fixed on the Israelite camp. They marched and still not a word was spoken. They marched and Jericho watched. The stage was set. The people of Israel had obeyed. The ark had been carried. The priests had sounded their horns, and the walls, the walls waited. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, the camp of Israel stirred with purpose. This was no ordinary morning. Today was the seventh day, the day everything would change. From the top of Jericho's walls, guards watched with weary eyes. Joshua walked among the people, his face calm yet fierce with focus. The priests took their positions, carrying the Ark of the Covenant with reverence. 7 of them held ram's horns close to their lips, waiting for the moment. The people fell into formation behind them. Already the command was clear. March, and they did. Once, twice, 3 times, 4, 5, 6. From the walls, Jericho's watchmen no longer mocked. They stood frozen and terrified. Then came the 7th lap. The priests raised their horns and blew a thunderous blast, the signal. Joshua turned to the people, his voice rising above the echoes of the horns. "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city." And in that moment, they did. From thousands of Israelite voices came a roar unlike anything the city had ever heard. A holy battle cry full of faith, fury, and fire. The earth seemed to tremble beneath their feet. The sound cracked through the air like a storm over the mountains. And then, it happened. A groan, a rumble, a crack. The ground beneath Jericho shifted. The mighty walls, those thick, towering walls built to keep enemies out, buckled inward as though pressed by the weight of the heavens. Stones burst like splinters. Foundations collapsed. Watchtowers crumbled into heaps of dust. Screams echoed from within the city. In seconds, Jericho's unbreakable defense became nothing more than rubble. Israel's warriors rushed in the city, now exposed, fell quickly. But one house, one section of the wall remained intact. The home of Rahab, surrounded by her family, her parents, her siblings, even distant relatives. She held her breath. She had obeyed, she had believed, and now she could only trust. Then 2 figures rushed in. It was them. The same spies she had once hidden under flax on her rooftop. Now they had come to keep their word. Rahab they called, "Come quickly, come." Just as they had sworn, the spies led Rahab and her family out of the city before the destruction was complete. Rahab and her family were brought outside the camp of Israel for purification, but her story didn't end there. She wasn't just spared. She was welcomed, adopted, brought into the people of God. Her past no longer defined her. Her faith did. The rest of the city was burned, and everything in it except for the silver, gold, bronze, and iron was set apart for the Lord's treasury, because this victory belonged to God alone. As the smoke rose over the ruins, Joshua turned to the people and pronounced a curse upon the ruins of Jericho. "Cursed is the man who tries to rebuild this city. At the cost of his firstborn, he will lay its foundation. At the cost of his youngest, he will set up its gates." The victory at Jericho was more than just a military win. It was a spiritual triumph. It signaled to all of Canaan that the God of Israel was with his people. Word spread like wildfire. Kingdoms trembled. Kings began to form coalitions, fearing the approach of Joshua and his God-led army. But for Israel, the fall of Jericho was a test of obedience. Had they tried to take the city by their own methods, they would have failed. But because they obeyed, even when it made no sense, they saw God move in power. For Rahab, it was a new beginning. She was no longer Rahab the prostitute, but Rahab the faithful, grafted into the nation of Israel. She would go on to marry a man named Salmon from the tribe of Judah, and together they would have a son named Boaz, the same Boaz who would one day marry Ruth. From them came Obed, the father of Jesse, who was the father of King David, and generations later, Jesus, the Messiah. Yes, think about it. Rahab, a pagan prostitute from a condemned city, became a direct ancestor of the King of Kings. Why? Because she believed. Because she acted on that belief. Because she hid the spies, hung the scarlet cord, and entrusted her life to the God of Israel. The story of Jericho is more than just a chapter from ancient history. It's a mirror reflecting the power of God, his unchanging faithfulness, and his quiet call to trust him even when we don't fully understand. God's instructions to Joshua and the Israelites seemed strange, marching silently around a city instead of charging it with swords. Shouting only when told. It didn't make sense by human logic, but their obedience, even when it seemed foolish, unlocked God's miraculous power. In many ways, our lives are like that today. How often do we face moments where God's plans don't add up, where the path seems unclear and our faith is tested? Sometimes he asks us to move forward step by step without seeing the full picture. In those moments, obedience isn't easy. It often feels risky, even scary. But just as with Israel, obedience is the doorway to miracles. The Israelites did not conquer Jericho by their strength or clever strategy. They won by the hand of God. Our victories in life over guilt, brokenness, addiction, loneliness, injustice, temptation, and many more are not won by might or power, but by the Spirit of the living God working in and through us. And then there is Rahab. Rahab's story shines a light on a truth that can change everything. No one is beyond God's reach. No past is too dark. No mistake too great. Rahab was a woman with a complicated past, living on the edge of society. Yet her faith saved her, and not only saved her, but made her part of God's plan for redemption. She became an ancestor of the Savior himself. Her story whispers hope to anyone who feels unworthy or forgotten, that God sees beyond who we were and calls us into who we can become. So, what walls are standing in your life today? Fear, doubt, past mistakes. Like Jericho's walls, they seem unbreakable. But when faith meets obedience, when you trust God beyond what you can see, those walls begin to fall. When God leads, victory comes. Trust Him beyond your understanding and watch what He will do.